we live in Canada, we don't talk that much about water. We just always assume it's there. We turn on a tap, we go to a lake, we fish in a river. We have rivers, lakes, and water, wells, springs everywhere. But when you're living in the Middle East in a desert climate, water is very much a topic of conversation, simply because there really isn't much water. There's no lakes and rivers to speak of, certainly not plentiful. And so wells are very important. Springs are very important. You go back as far as, well, Abraham. Everywhere Abraham went, he dug a well. Isaac dug a well. If you're going to have an encampment or start a village, let alone a town or a city, it had to have a water source. Whole battles were fought over single wells. When you read the story of Isaac, you find that every time he built a well, enemies would come and fight him to try and get that well away from him. Again, towns and villages were established because of a water source, because of a well. One day Jesus was traveling from Jerusalem up to Galilee, and he chose to go through Samaria. And he sat down beside a well. He was tired, he was thirsty. And here we have another quite familiar well story. And as Jesus is sitting there beside this well, a woman appears alone, and she begins to put her bucket into the well to draw up some water. And Jesus speaks to her, and he says to her, would you give me some water? And she's surprised that he would speak to her. You see, there were two issues here. Number one, here's a man speaking to a woman, which was not usually done. And also you have a Jew speaking to a Samaritan. The Jews despised the Samaritan. And why did they despise them? Well, the Samaritans at one time were the northern kingdom of Israel. And when the Assyrians destroyed the northern kingdom, they took half the population out and refilled it with foreigners who intermarried with the Jews that were there, the Israelites who were there. And so the true Israelite, the true Jew down in Judea, considered now the Samaritans to the north half breeds. They were just half brothers and sisters, and because they weren't true blooded, they despised them. They looked down upon them. And we find that kind of sentiment everywhere in the world even today. But as Jesus asks her a question, she's surprised because he's a Jewish man speaking to a Samaritan woman. There were gender barriers he was crossing here. There were racial barriers that Jesus was crossing. This woman was, as you read the story, also considered immoral. She had 5 husbands. She had been shoved from man to man to man. She was broken by rejection. She was broken by being ostracized. The man she was living with now was not her husband. He had not given her the luxury of the protection of marriage. And as a result, she was considered an outsider. She would be considered someone who was to be ostracized and stayed away from. And so this woman was used and abused and lonely and broken until she meets Jesus. We read in verses 9 and 10 of John chapter 4, the woman was surprised, for Jews refused to have anything to do with Samaritans. And she said to Jesus, "You are a Jew, and I am a Samaritan woman. Why are you asking me for a drink?" And Jesus replied, "If you only knew the gift God has for you, and who you are speaking to, you would ask me, and I would give you living water." This term, living water, there were 2 types of water. There was dead water, which would have been water that just laid stagnant in a pond or a pool. It could be marshy water. It could be water in a cistern. Water that sits there and promises so much. It can give you an initial quenching of your thirst, but can also make you sick and even lead to your death. And on the other hand, there's living water. Living water was considered water which was moving. It could be a stream or a river or a spring bubbling up or a fountain shooting up, or it could be the rainwater coming down to refresh the dry soil and to be able to produce crops. This was water that was life-generating, life-sustaining, and this is the water that Jesus offers to give to her. And it's interesting as you read through this story how Jesus turns the subject from asking for a drink of water, physical water, around to offering her living water, offering her water by which if she would drink, she would never thirst again. And as you look through this chapter, I'd like you to just look at some of the principles of evangelism that Jesus uses to bring her from where she is in her need to pointing out himself as the source of life. And these principles of evangelism that he uses can be very much used by us. So it's an interesting study, and I encourage you to do that as you have your studies as a group. Let me just draw your attention to another verse here, Jeremiah chapter 2, verse 13, where God said, "For my people have done two evil things. They have abandoned me, the fountain of," and here's that word, "living water." They've abandoned me, the fountain of living water, and they have dug for themselves cracked cisterns that can hold no water. Not only have they abandoned God, the fountain of living water, they have settled for cistern water. And not even that, cisterns that are cracked and the water isn't even there. And so the best it offers is dead water that can make them sick, or no water at all. You see, the reality is that every one of us have a thirst that only Christ can meet. And he invites us here. God says, "Come to me, come thirsty." The same plea that Jesus is giving to that woman at the well. I encourage you to spend some time in your groups just thinking about the kinds of broken cisterns that people are digging today that promise refreshment in their lives and may even give them immediate refreshment, but in the end make them sick and even lead to death. And then as you're thinking about that, in what ways is Christ the fountain of living water? In what ways is he living water? So enjoy the kind of conversation that Jesus would have had in a desert climate, talking about water, dead water, living water, what Jesus can mean to you as the source of life, the living water. You'll notice in your outline that I've given to you, there are 4 questions. You may be able to answer or talk about all 4 questions. Probably you won't have the time to do that. I would encourage you to look at 2 of them, maybe even 1 of them that you want to spend your time on, and enjoy growing together around God's Word.